I am talking today about Citizen Adapters AI and multilingual health communication, students supporting industry. And this was a research project that I undertook with two colleagues, Dr. Jack Zhao, who's based at the University of Hong Kong, and Dr. Michael Cammett, who has a number of affiliations, including UNSW, but he also works for the Southwestern Sydney Health Literacy Unit. So he's kind of an industry partner himself. Our actual industry partner for this was the Children's Tumor Foundation, who are a charity specialising in neurofibromatosis. And yes, I have practiced saying that many times through this project. Before I go too much further, I just quickly want to acknowledge the country that I'm presenting from and the elders past, present and emerging. I'm on Turrbal or Yagara country here in Mianjin, and it always was and always will be Indigenous land. And there's a story about the artwork, but I think we're a bit pressed for time. So feel free to ask about that in the questions. I'll quickly talk about why we did this project, what we did, a little bit about what we learned. There was a lot, so I'm just going to give some very quick highlights and then touch on some of the next steps. So this project really came about from a real world problem that the Children's Tumor Foundation had, and that was that they needed translated materials for particular community groups. The documents they originally needed translated were actually homeschool communications. They were about preparing children for going to school if they had neurofibromatosis, and they needed it for a Chinese family. And they reached out to Michael and said, can you help? Do you know how we could use AI? If you don't help us, we're going to put it in Google Translate. Michael reached out to me, and he and I have been working together on another project looking at health communication. So we're quite aware that there is a lot of research showing that there is a lack of availability of translated materials. It can be inaccessible in the other language as well as even in English, because elevated health literacy levels tend to stand when they get translated, even when it's by a professional, because they're not meant to be adjusting the literacy level. They may or may not be culturally adapted. And probably the biggest barrier for charities is the cost. So the Children's Tumor Foundation were quoted about $20,000 per language for the suite of documents that they would need translated. At the same time, my contact, Dr. Jack Zhao from the Uni of Hong Kong, he and I had been in touch and were continuing to be a little bit worried about the lack of socialisation and intercultural experiences that our students were getting off the back of COVID, and hoping to develop that, but also the emerging need for them to develop their digital literacy skills around AI. And he'd been doing some work on that. They have a digital literacy sort of lab and working group over there. So we thought about bringing all of those together and ended up creating a free digital badge. It's titled Multilingual Crisis and Disaster Communication, because health, when it's kind of an emergency, can fit within that. And it includes a 5-week course that our students as citizen adapters and industry partners can take part in whenever we run it. And it's kind of bespoke is the idea for each iteration, depending on the industry partner's needs. And you might notice I haven't used the word translators here. I've used adapters. Again, we're a bit pressed on time, so feel free to ask about that in the questions, but it is an intentional choice to use that. So what did we actually do? We had about 24 students from Hong Kong and Australia over 5 weeks online. We also had our industry partner, the Children's Tumor Foundation. The Children's Tumor Foundation provided a selected number of documents. It ended up being 3 documents that they'd like to get adapted. And then we took the students initially through, they had a session with the Children's Tumor Foundation, learning about the background of neurofibromatosis and the need for the documents. Then Michael, Jack and I took turns giving a sort of a presentation on health literacy, maximising translatability, or how you might actually use AI to work with this. But this is very much a pilot study. So we were learning from the students about the processes of using AI. And that was kind of one of the goals of this project, was to get some feedback from the students. If you were just someone working in industry or a student who doesn't necessarily know how to do this, what kind of things can we learn? So we ended up getting the students into groups, and most of them did speak another language, and we were able to get them to work on Cantonese, Mandarin, Indonesian and Russian. Throughout the process, the students did reflections. We did photo voice style ones. They did a quick survey with some community members to get feedback on the accuracy and trust. And then we did focus groups. We're also going to have a checking report by a professional translator, which is significantly cheaper, and that's coming. So a little bit about what we learned. I'm going to focus on what we learned about working with AI and what we learned about working with students as citizen adapters here. So one of the really interesting things was related to the momentum of the AI. So the students did reflect on the fact that it wasn't this really quick and easy process like they had expected. It still took time. It was quicker than if they translated everything, but it took time. They talked about the fact that they also had to resist perfection when using AI because they did have time constraints. They had other assessments. They needed to get it done by a certain time. But essentially, it was just this idea that it wasn't as quick as it seemed. And the momentum was often disrupted by the fact that the AI just didn't listen. It had a poor memory. And even when they gave it instructions, it would just do weird things. And I'll show you an example of that on the next slide. Another really interesting point about using AI, we did ask the students to share one of their first drafts with some community members to get feedback on the accuracy and if people would trust that information, knowing that AI was involved. And we expected that people would just not really trust it because AI was involved. And that's certainly not the feedback that we got. And that was including the fact that sometimes people were saying the accuracy's, it's okay, it's not great. I can tell AI was involved. But they still said they trust it. And we think that's because the trust is actually based on the institution that it's come from, the Children's Tumor Foundation, which is quite a reputable organisation. We did also ask the students to do some photo voice reflections, and we actually got them to use AI software to generate images for that. So just a couple that I really loved here. The students talked about the fact that the AI was like a tourist that didn't really understand what it was doing and did the Russian one. I think my favorite is this reflection here where the student talked about the fact that the AI, everything will collide after a while and information it grasps in the previous conversation starts to pop up. Not even just other information. This same student talked about the fact that they were translating into Chinese and sometimes German would pop up. So not even a similar language was happening. And he likened that to seeing Shakespeare and David Bowie playing music together, which I thought was quite funny. Another student used this sort of symbolism of a binary star system. It needs the two stars to stabilize the stellar objects in the system. And they're talking there about the AI and the human input both being really important. And this one here, which is kind of obvious when you hear the explanation, but the student explained that this looks like a novel. It looks like correct text. If you zoom in, it's just complete gobbledygook. And they thought that was sometimes what was happening with the AI. From a distance, it might have looked okay, but once you started really paying attention, it wasn't necessarily as accurate as we thought. Some of the things that were really important for working with the students as citizen adapters and including AI were conversations around whether it was bilingualism that was the necessary skill or biliteracy. So it wasn't just enough to speak another language. The students pointed out that you need to understand the grammar. You need to be able to talk about the grammar. So that meta language around grammar and linguistics was really important. And I liked this quote here from a student who said, even if you don't really speak a language you're adapting into or you're not a native speaker, you should at least be able to tell when the generative AI hasn't given you the intended language. For example, did it give you Japanese or Korean and you ask for Chinese? So sometimes that's less obvious, especially when some of those languages do share some of their script. Other examples, when it was putting German in, it was more obvious. Something else the students found really motivating was the relational aspect of it. So knowing that the translation would go to actual families and hearing that story from Meredith, who we worked with at the Children's Tumor Foundation, was something they found really motivating. And something that I found really fascinating were the tricky translations that didn't matter how much preparation we gave the students, how many times we told them to use the health literacy software, to look at the principles of maximizing translatability, to consider English as a second language learning principles and avoid collocations and phrasal verbs. Still, these things came up. And part of it's because in certain languages, certain things don't translate, but words like referral and cut out didn't translate well into Chinese. Little ones, I think that was actually a student referring on Tagalog, but which wasn't in the project, but it was just interesting that they then were able to share other examples. Fulfilling and people with a disability, the students noted, didn't work so well in Indonesian, and skin with Russian. And it was really interesting why that one was problematic. And it was only problematic when we had a group member who didn't speak Russian who back translated something to check the accuracy of it, and it got back translated incorrectly. So it really highlights that I think students, it is beneficial to be bilingual, but also biliterate. So our next steps with that, we're hoping to run the digital badge in this project again with Allergies Australia. They were really keen to get involved. We're working on an open access textbook, so we'll include the information from those modules, and then the plan is to have sort of case studies from the different organisations that we are working with, including a glossary with those tricky translations and potentially some clear and explicit definitions of them so that we don't have to translate the word, we can translate the definition. And obviously working on some publications. So using a lot of Donna Haraway's work there to think about, this symbiotic relationship between human and non-human, and also the response abilities, the capacity to respond, in her words, for citizen adapters. Just a quick thank you to the research team, that's Jack and Michael, and also to Meredith Finelli, who is the National Support Coordinator with the Children's Tumor Foundation, who was involved. And I should also just point out that from her perspective, she did all the modules. She was involved in all of it as well. So she learned and said that not only has she now been able to update a lot of their documents so they translate better, but she's really happy that now a bunch of other people know what or about the existence of neurofibromatosis as well. So that's all from me.
Thank you, Danielle. Very well done. Golly, we've even got some minutes to talk about this. Any questions for Danielle? I saw some really thought-provoking commentary on the side there. Sue, I wonder, would you have any questions, any pithy questions at this stage?
It wasn't a picky question. It was more like, I just really liked that you selected to highlight relationality, that's everybody thinks about AI as procedural and technocratic, and this is supposed to be a tool or something like that. But it's actually, if you just trust it to replace somebody's job, then what's the relationality between it producing reams and volumes of writing and outputs that it has no moral responsibility to guarantee to the reader that that's accurate, good, fit for purpose. So I think that was, just really good. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. No, it's and I think we're using the cyborg metaphor. At least Jack has been working on that, and I think that fits really nicely and brings up some of those ethical questions around using it and how it's used as well.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'm looking at one of Sue's observations that someone with cross-referencing expertise needs to expose the occasions when AI makes a stuff up. This is a tricky thing, isn't it? Because it gets a lot right, but when it doesn't, the little bits it doesn't get right can be really wrong, can be really contrary, and kind of dangerous. You need that significant expertise to double check what it's doing. And it sounds like you did expose a few of those situations.
Yeah, but it's scary because we prepared the students so well. And I think even Michael and Jack, I had said to them, particularly Michael, he works with there's these other health literacy like software where you can put text in and it'll point out words that are difficult. And it does some of the work. It's using machine learning, but it doesn't do everything. And then I was really talking about an approach called minimal languages, which Professor Cliff Goddard over in HLSS has been kind of seminal in developing, and saying you can't just ask the AI to rewrite it in minimal languages, which is maximizing the translatability, because it doesn't know what that is, because all of the research on that, one, it's very limited, and two, it's all it's not open access. So when the students did do that, all the AI did was summarize it and ended up missing half of the information, which again is dangerous, and why we do need to be careful around who we would partner with for this. We couldn't probably partner with any kind of organization where there would be a really big risk of harm in terms of the communication that we'd be working with because of things like that.
Okay, Danielle, thank you so much. Christine, thank you so much. And Catherine and Sue, thank you very much for opening our lightning talk today. While we've been speaking, we've been plotting to have a follow-up session with Christine. So we'll start to promote that reasonably soon, because there's a lot there. But of course, there's so much in Sue and Catherine's presentation, and Danielle, yours too. So I hope we can get back to you before too long in these settings or others. So I hope everyone has a really good day and are suitably stimulated after this lightning-like tour through these ideas. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.